The beat that couldn't be boxed. The mind that wouldn't sit still in the classroom, buzzed with the fluorescent lights and the ticking of the clock on the wall, felt louder than the teacher's voice. He stared at the whiteboard, pencil tapping relentlessly against the desk, foot bouncing under the table. He wasn't trying to be disruptive, but his thoughts moved too fast. His ideas, they wouldn't line up in straight rows like they were told to. They looped and darted and spun like a rhythm, like music. Teachers called him distracted and unfocused. Some said he was lazy, and others labeled him a problem. But what no one realized was this: his mind wasn't broken. It was just too fast for the room he was in. Born with this static, he grew up in a rough neighborhood, raised by a single mom in a world that didn't hand out chances. They weren't music studios or mentorship programs. There were just block parties, boomboxes, and the relentless beat that thumped through his chest and veins. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't shut off his brain. But what if his thoughts, the chaos, could be sculpted? What if this wild, bouncing mental energy wasn't a curse, but the very thing that made him different? He started making music in his bedroom, writing verses between distractions, producing beats when the world went quiet at night. And soon, the kid who couldn't focus was building something no one else could. Mm-hmm. He was told he had ADHD and it would hold him back. But he used it like fuel. When others lost focus, he locked in. When others thought linear, he thought exponential. When others asked why, he asked, why not? Why not 5 projects instead of 1? He didn't just make music. He built worlds, fashion, technology, startups, futurism, philanthropy. He became known not just for his hits, but for his impossible to categorize brain, a mind that saw the world in beats, blueprints, and possibilities. He even once said, I have ADHD, but I use it to my advantage. He used it to become laser focused. And that became his superpower, not slowing down, but speeding up. He co-founded one of the most influential music groups of his generation, wrote anthems that topped charts across continents. He became a sought-after producer by legends. But he didn't stop at the stage. He launched tech companies, building AI products and smart wearables. He partnered with NASA. He educated kids in underserved communities about STEM and innovation. He became a creative strategist for major brands and ambassadors of possibility. His mind never slowed. So instead, he taught it where to go. Who he is, what it means. The kid who couldn't sit still, the young man who felt too loud, too much, too scattered to fit in, the visionary who used ADHD not as an excuse, but as a vehicle for genius. This man is Will.i.am. Musician, inventor, tech visionary, cultural force, a living proof that your mind isn't broken. Your world just hasn't caught up to you yet. Turn up the volume on who you are. People will try to quiet you. They'll say you think too fast or you're disorganized. But you never focus long enough to finish anything. Your brain isn't a bug. It's the feature. Maybe what you need isn't less energy, but better direction. Because once you aim that energy into something meaningful, you don't just stay focused. You create what no one else could ever imagine. So ask yourself, are you shrinking your mind to fit in to someone else's expectation? Or are you bold enough to build a world big enough to match it? Welcome to the Mental Health Janitors. I'm your host, Sergeant Q, and with me as always, Doc Jess.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
So today's episode is about ADHD and how you can use it as a superpower and not a boat anchor.
Sure. And we're also going to reframe it as neurodivergence, and we'll get into that a little bit more.
Yes. 1984 Newspeak, here we come.
Wow. Yeah. So the reason I like to use the term neurodivergent is because in my research and my personal experience counseling people and my personal experience being ADHD is the evolution of ADHD has come so far. And really, if I'm going to just throw some numbers out, it's like 70% of the population are born with a neurotypical brain and 30% are born with a neurodivergent brain. And that might even be growing to more of like 35, 65.
Give us a definition. What is neurodivergent?
Right. So neurodivergence is a non-medical term that simply describes a brain that processes, learns, or behaves differently than what's considered typical or expected by society. It's not about being less than, it's just about being wired differently. So some common forms of neurodivergence include ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, dyslexia, and even Tourette's or OCD in some contexts. These aren't mental illnesses, they're brain differences that impact how people think, focus, regulate emotions, and interact with the world. So when we say someone is neurodivergent, we're not labeling them as broken. We're recognizing that their brain works in a way that may require different supports, but also often brings unique strengths, creativity, and insight. We're also not saying that neurodivergence is an excuse to not grow in self-discipline, and we'll get into that a little bit later as well.
So why do we have to label these things different all the time? I got to be honest, I feel so burdened by every year. There's all these new words that we have to change, all these new sayings that we can't say anymore that we have to now change it to this other word. It feels very overwhelming and it feels like it's just somebody trying to make themselves more self-important.
Sure.
I'm saying that's how it feels to me, is someone's like, can't we just keep it the way that it is and understand it better instead of having to create a new term, create a new thing, a new social justice movement around the language that we use? I am so burned out on this thing. It drives me absolutely crazy because it feels like it becomes this buzzword now of self-importance, just like we saw when people are like, oh, that person is narcissistic. And then that became the buzzword. Now everybody is diagnosing every bad relationship as being a narcissist. And I just can't deal with it anymore. It reminds me of the book 1984, where it's called Newspeak. And we just keep changing words so they mean something different to keep the population confused. And that's how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that's how you're feeling, and I can understand how it looks that way. So for me, using the term neurodivergent isn't for self-importance, it's for understanding, right? Because I listed all the things that fall under neurodivergence, right? And so this way I don't have to say, the people with ADHD and Tourette's and OCD and autism spectrum. Like, it's just like there's a neurodivergent brain and there's a neurotypical brain. And society has been raised on this neurotypical brain, and it's created the people with the neurodivergent brain to have a lot of negative effects, such as the school system is for the neurotypical brain. The neurodivergent brain doesn't excel well in that system, and so a lot of them are put into special ed.
Yeah, I was going to say they have a special class for this. It's called special ed.
So the term special ed, right, has its own negative annotations, right? So like the window lickers and the short bus, and
but it is a smaller bus. Like, it is a shorter bus. Like, that's the real deal.
That's totally fine. But let me give
window
you,
licker. Okay.
Let me give you one.
Maybe if they're like young Army cadets or like.
Wow. Okay, crayon eaters. Listen, let me give you a perfect example. My husband, he is a brilliant man. He can fix almost anything. He can go in and figure out mechanically. Like, he's very artistic. He just has his communication is completely different, right? And he was in special ed. And it's because he didn't fit into the mold of sitting in a class, and his brain worked a little differently. And those kids growing up, especially, he's a little older. So if they didn't fit into the mold, they were considered dumb or undisciplined. Which some of it is undisciplined, right? And there's a lot of good reasons why people say, I don't want the label ADHD, right? Because there was a huge push for a kid with bad behavior. We're just going to slap that on them. ADHD, when really they just need structure and discipline in the home, right? And there's so much research out now that, especially out of Europe, right? Like 70% of negative symptoms of ADHD can be controlled with proper lifestyle. Lifestyle meaning limited screen times, clean eating, structure in their day as far as getting movement in, and a proper circadian rhythm. Okay, if you get those things, 70% of the population who have ADHD or these neurodivergent negative traits that they want to veer away from can be controlled over those things, and we just throw medication at these children so quickly, and even adults, and the medication is ruining your kids. So I would say 1 out of 50 people with a neurodivergent brain could benefit from medication. The rest, it should be controlled with proper diet, proper movement or exercise, proper discipline around screens, and a proper circadian rhythm, good sleep. If you're throwing medication at your kids, I'm telling you, you're hurting them. You're not helping them. Okay, off my soapbox. So they threw medication at my husband and he became a zombie. And just to fit into this mold of this is how you're supposed to look or act or whatever. When, like, again, we're not giving an excuse for people. I
No, but that's what people use it as, Jess. I see this a lot. Influencers or people going online and saying like, oh, I'm ADHD, so that's why I'm this way. And now you all have to now accept this behavior that I have and this disruption that I create and these wild mood swings that I have because now I have this ADHD. It's like a badge of honor now. It's this victim mentality of, who can stack rank their victim mentality higher is the trump card. And I'm like, when did we celebrate the fact that you're a jerk? When did that become a thing?
Yeah.
And so that's where I really struggle with this newspeak, these labels, we're just not going to call it that anymore. We're going to call it something different. So it's easier for people to wave that flag. That's what I see.
Yes. And I see it as well. And that's
that
why
makes me crazy.
Sure. So Pastor Matt said something in his sermon about we are spirit led that I loved, right? He said, just because we get it wrong doesn't mean it's wrong.
Okay.
Just because so many people get it wrong doesn't mean terming it neurodivergence is wrong. Just because a select few and maybe even a majority use it as an excuse doesn't mean we're going to throw it all out, right? So for me, neurodivergence is I'm going to start with these questions.
So hold on. I see people celebrating mental illness.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to put things in place to help people do better and be better. Instead, they just celebrate where they're at and they want the whole world now to conform to this mental illness that people are experiencing. And that is so wrong on so many levels. Number one, you're forcing a society to believe something that we already know is not true. And number two, you're not actually helping that person by letting them live in that delusion.
Yes.
Instead of putting things in place to help them get out of that and do better and be better. And I see all these new terms that come in as just a crutch that people use to facilitate that celebration of a mental illness or a neurodivergent brain instead of helping them put things in place to be better and do better. And here's a little inside track, Jess, that you probably don't know. Your homeboy here was in special ed. Oh, yes.
I'm not surprised.
When I was, wait a minute.
For good reasons.
When I was really young, they were going to hold me back in first grade because I couldn't do the things that they wanted me, the lessons that they wanted me to do. I could give you the answer just like that, but they wanted me to write out all this detail and I got so bored with it.
Yeah,
and my mom had to fight and be like, no, I was one of the smartest kids in the class. I knew the stuff. I just didn't need to go through 10 steps to get there. I need step 1, step 2, and step 10. I got it.
Yeah.
They want me to go through all 10 steps and I got bored and disruptive and got in trouble a lot.
Yeah.
Fast forward to high school, they had this special ed program that was called CE2. And I remember thinking like, why am I spending all my time in this classroom? This is nuts. I can do all this stuff over here in CE2 on my own schedule. I graduated 6 months early because I asked to go into that class. Please let me go into there.
Yeah.
And I got everything done and worked a part-time job my senior year, graduated 6 months early.
Yeah.
I chose to go into that special education thing. I still had to do all the same work as the high school kids. So they didn't lower the bar for me.
Sure.
I just got to go there and work on my own schedule and I killed it.
Yeah.
And so I didn't look at these things like, oh, lower the bar, make special exceptions. Like, no, give me the time I need and I will crush this thing. because I didn't subscribe to that mentality of, oh, let's lower the bar, let's give you special treatment because, you think differently. That kind of stuff just really rubs me the wrong way. And so you guys, a lot of you are probably screaming at the podcast right now, like, you're such a jerk, you don't understand. I'm like, I do understand. And I also know what it takes to get over that, get through it. The same thing with trauma, not living in the victim mentality.
Yeah.
So when I'm coming at you sideways like this, it's because I'm in that and I found a way out. And if you just stay in that mold that the society wants to put you in of, oh, you think differently, so you've got to go over here and just live that way, you don't. You can be just as successful. You can be just as talented, just as part of society as everyone else. So don't get so hung up on these labels and use them as an excuse not to be a performer in society. Sorry,
Sure.
That's my soapbox.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. So yes and no.
Yes and no.
So, okay. So
This is where we draw the line.
yes.
here.
And I'm never an advocate for making excuses for our behaviors, right? But let me give you one example. So for instance, this is one thing so we have two little girls, okay? We have a neurotypical little girl named Skylar. We have a neurodivergent little girl named Autumn. Okay. They're both 4. When you're 4, you start to become really autonomous, right? You want to put your own shoes on. Okay. And in that process, you put your shoes on the wrong feet more than 50% of the time, right? Everybody with kids knows this process. So you tell little neurotypical Skylar, hey, honey, you put your shoes on the wrong feet. And she looks down and she goes, oh, okay. And she changes them. And you tell little neurodivergent Autumn, hey, honey, you put your shoes on the wrong feet. She goes, I know. Like, she doesn't have enough life experience to start making excuses. It's that initial reaction of the neurodivergent brain versus neurotypical brain that she takes things personal, and any kind of correction is criticism. And what I think is important to have the labels is not to give them excuses, but for me, it's helped me parent Autumn different a little bit than I've had to parent Liberty. So for instance, when Liberty was 10, I said, go clean your room, baby. And she would go clean her room. Her neurotypical brain helped her. It's just a little easier for her to just go clean her room. Autumn, 2 hours later, is swinging in her swing with her room even messier. And I'm like, girl. And I get so pissed off at her, right? Because we're raised in this generation that's like, you have to just do what you're told and you have to stay focused, right? And yes and no. Okay, so what we learn with her brain is she needs it broken up into steps. And so knowing she has a neurodivergent brain versus neurotypical, we're able to go in there and help her. Okay, girl, go get all of your shoes and put them on your shoe rack and then come get me and let me know you're done. She gets it, comes to me. Let me check. Okay, you got them all. Good job. High five. Reassure. She did a great job in that step. And then now go get all the towels and bring the towels to the laundry room. Done. And so maybe it takes 20 minutes instead of 15 with Liberty. And maybe it takes a little bit more effort and direction on my part, but I'm teaching her how her brain works and how she can be successful with the brain she's been given. I'm not saying, well, you're neurodivergent, so, it's okay, a mommy will do it for you. No, I'm giving her the right tools, and I'm helping her not feel like she's a constant letdown. A lot of people with neurodivergent brains grow up and they feel like they're a constant letdown from their parents because they can never do anything right, when really they just need a little bit of a different kind of system to help them.
I feel like the pendulum has swung from that parenting that you just talked about, where the kids constantly felt like a failure, to this other, everybody is a winner and participation trophy, right? Sure. And so that's where I've seen the pendulum swing way to the other side. And I'm like, no, let's bring that back. There's something in the middle. There's something key that you said right there, Jess. Mm-hmm. That was awesome. You said, let's build a pathway for you to find success.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about too.
Yes.
There's a pathway to success. And a lot of times people get this adult ADHD diagnosis and they're like, oh, that's why I am this way. And now they're just like, oh, great. That's the reason. Cool. I don't got to do nothing else. Anytime that anybody says anything to me, I'm just like, well, I'm ADHD. No. I just dealt with this with a guy a few months ago. I'll just say a few months ago that I was working with. I'm doing some corporate training and this guy is just a jerk. Like he tried to undercut my authority before I even got up on stage to teach when I was still just meeting and having lunch with these guys. He said some things that were just kind of taking shots at me to I don't even know why he was doing it, to be honest. But then I have to get up there and teach. And he kept doing this throughout to everybody else in the group. And when it got to his turn to talk to me one-on-one, his first thing he says is, oh, I have this diagnosis and that's why I'm not good at these things and why I do the things that I do. And I just thought that is such a freaking cop-out to say that as the excuse for all of this bad behavior. And you just saw every person that he interacted with, they were just cringing like, oh gosh, please don't partner me with this guy. Because the way he acts, and he uses that now as the shield, like, you can't tell me I'm a jerk because I got this diagnosis. And I just thought, this is what I see.
Sure. Yeah. And that's right. It's just because somebody gets it wrong doesn't mean it is wrong. Okay. So I have to know the labels and the diagnosis factors of a neurodivergent brain so I can help empower parents and people to find that system to lead them to success.
Yes, I love it, Jess. You explained it very well. And I understand
I finally get approval from you.
I understand that now. We are on the same page. We're just coming from two different angles.
Yeah.
And I'm always going to be the hardliner of, yeah, that's your diagnosis. What can we do to make you successful? Let's put those steps in place. You may just have to work harder at it. So what?
And so that's something that I have to tell Autumn, our youngest, all the time. Honey, it just means you're going to have to work a little harder in some areas of your life. But you know what? Some areas of your life are going to come a little easier.
But you know what's great? Here's the great thing. Those of us who have that brain, who we have to work a little harder at things, because you have to work harder and you do it and still stay up with your peers, you're actually going to far exceed them in the future. And here's why. Because you're building your ACC, your anterior cingulate cortex. When you do hard things, things that you don't want to do, when you do them, that part of the brain grows, allowing you to do the next one and the next one and the next one. So all these neurotypicals who just kind of cruised through high school and didn't have to work really hard, and all of those who had to work really hard, when we get out into the world, these people are just chilling and we are blowing by them because we've had to endure all this hardship. And we're cooking right along. And these guys back here are schmucks. You know,
they're in a little bit of shock. Research shows in college, actually, those neurotypicals that don't have to put a huge effort into high school or that structure that is made for them, then they get to college and it's a little different. They're like, whoa, I actually have to study. I actually have to do work. I have to all these things. And then the neurodivergents are like, oh, I've been doing this for 12 years. Right. And so, yes, their grit, they have a lot more mental resilience and a lot of more mental grit. And this is another reason why neurodivergents do very good in high stress, high response jobs. Firefighters, EMTs, police officers,
military.
Lots of neurodivergents excel under stress because their anterior cingulate cortex is larger from growing up in that kind of just battle back and forth. So it's really cool. It looks and you know, there's some research that shows there's like 26 different kinds of ADHD.
You know, it's funny. Just as you said that, it made me think of you and me and our experiences in the military.
Yeah,
as where you had this kind of typical upbringing with your family and not a lot of yelling and screaming and, threats of violence. You didn't have all that. I grew up in the drug trade. I grew up with that all the time. No power, no running water. And so when I'm in boot camp and everybody is losing their mind, I'm like, what is wrong with you people? I excelled. And not because I was trying harder, but because everybody else is freaking out and I'm just operating at the same level. Like, well, I'm okay in these high stress situations. I did very well through boot camp and all my other training. I was always at the top of the class because my body understood how to respond to those stressful situations. So that's what made me think of, because you said when you got to boot camp, you freaked out. Like, what is happening right now?
Well, what's so important about this analogy, which is great, I'm glad you brought it up, is the habitat we are put into, I was fine with because I was raised on the mission field with my parents and I was raised poor and I was raised, like not getting everything I want, right? But I was raised in a very emotionally healthy environment. So the thing that really set me off was getting yelled at.
Wait. The military's not emotionally healthy.
That's my point, is I was thrown off by all these drill sergeants yelling at me. I was fine with the living quarters. I was fine with the meals. I was fine with the habitat, right? It was The yelling, I got on the phone, right, with my mom that first Friday I could call, and I just cried. I couldn't even speak because of the yelling. That's the thing that hurt me the most. And then I feel like
I'm
I know.
laughing at your pain. I'm just remembering boot camp, watching people melt down like that.
Yeah, and a lot of friends that I make, I have, are my sweet Hispanic friends who, they make fun of me because they're like, "Oh, your mom never throwed a chunkle at you and didn't yell at you, right?" And they would laugh at me too because I'm like, "I hate being yelled at," and they're like, "Oh, girl, please, you're right. I got yelled at. You were probably yelled at a lot and all that." Stuff, and I melted down. That's and I look back to my army years, and I remember at a young age, right, I was 19, seeing, like, I'm sure it was the Lord just imparting like a little bit of knowledge and discernment in me that your upbringing, right, there a lot of people came from dysfunction. Because I didn't, I was able to see how I handled it's also like a very rampant in PTSD is I I would hate to do this study, but it would be interesting that, the 22 veterans a day that decide to take their life, let's look at their background, because I swear, right, the only thing that kept me alive during those dark, dark years was Jesus, ultimately, but also the foundations of that emotional stability that my parents instilled in me in a young age, because I did have a very healthy upbringing. I did have a very healthy relationship with my emotions. I did know that I was loved and cared for, and that's why I was able to say, hey, if I have these thoughts to this certain extent, I'm going to go check myself in, right? I'm not comfortable talking to you guys about it because you're never going to understand, but I do know if my mind starts going here, and some of you guys know what I'm talking about, that's the dangerous spot, and I will check myself in. And if I've checked myself into the psych or into the hospital 4 times in 20 years because one time we went to the I tried going to the gun range, and it set me, and one time on Halloween when it's just there, I remember specifically the 4 times I had to go and things that triggered me to get me there. But I had that sense, like that stability to fall back on with my PTSD still being real. But I think the majority of the soldiers that can't cope with the PTSD, where they get to the point where they feel like it's just the pain's too much. I'm assuming, my hypothesis would be the majority of them had traumatic childhoods.
I I think you're probably right. And it reminds me of the first time I went in to the VA and I did the whole questionnaire, I did the whole thing. And I remember I was trying to get a disability rating, just any rating, so that way I didn't have to pay out of pocket like I was at the VA. And I know you guys are like, that's not true. You never had to pay out of pocket. I'm like, yeah, welcome to 2005. Yes, you did. If you did not have a diagnosis, you paid out of pocket. They've changed that since, but I was one of those guys that fell through the cracks. And I remember the first denial letter I got back, because they ask you about your childhood and all this stuff, is, oh, you had a really rough childhood, so that's why you're struggling, not because you just spent a year in Iraq in a combat zone. Yeah. Denied. That was the first denial letter I got. Yeah. And so I remember that distinctly and how frustrating that was. And I wasn't the only one that was happening to. That was happening to thousands upon thousands of veterans. And I think you're right, because I was doing fine, honestly, up until that point of being deployed. I had dealt with trauma as a kid, but it wasn't impacting my life the way combat did. Yes. And it just exacerbated that entire issue.
So, you guys, so we are going to do a short series on neurodivergence, or ADHD, autistic spectrum disorder, dyslexia falls under this. And so I'm going to leave you with a couple questions.
Casey, you answered these questions, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right, first question is, could this be you? Okay. Do you or someone you know take correction overly personally or spiral after criticism? Do you consistently start projects with energy only to leave them unfinished? Do you struggle with time management, constantly running late or losing track of time? Do small tasks feel overwhelming even though you know they should be easy? Have people told you you're overly sensitive or too emotional? Do you daydream often or mentally check out in conversations? Are you always misplacing things? Keys?
Wait, what'd you say?
Shut up. Are you always misplacing things? Keys, phones, even thoughts mid-sentence? Do you perform well under pressure but can't get started without it? Have you always felt different, or even if you were high functioning or smart? Did you do well in school until structure dropped off in college or adulthood?
I feel attacked right now.
That's what Casey said. You guys, I want to encourage you to pause and reflect.
Here's the thing. I could answer yes to almost every one of those, but I also have been like, yes, I struggle with that. And so these are the things I put in place.
Yes.
Losing things, I don't know where stuff is. I have a drawer for everything. Keys
Yes.
always go in the same place. Keys, wallet, always in the same place.
Yes.
In a drawer. And I try to get my family to do this. Like, where are my keys? Like, I don't know. Did you check here? I said, no, they go in one place. Put it in one place because my brain knows that's where this thing lives. And if it doesn't live there, then it just is lost. It lives here. Put it here. Sorry.
OCD cures ADHD.
It does. You have to put things in place so that way you can overcome these things that you know you struggle with.
Yes, but if you don't know you really struggle with them, right?
Oh yeah, this is an awareness for you guys. But once you now have awareness,
Yes.
like I struggle with this, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to give you things that you can put in place so you can have
Yes.
success in these areas.
Yes.
So you don't have to struggle with this anymore. Well, you're always going to struggle with it, but
Yeah.
it's going to be a little bit easier because you're going to put things in place that you do every day that makes this much easier for you.
Yes. And you guys, I have a lot of tools, right? Because I went undiagnosed. I had parents who believed, ADHD is just a label that people put on kids that misbehave, right? And so I went my whole life being severely ADHD and finally got an adult diagnosis in a very intense monitored test I had to take of like, they video recorded my eye movement and like lots of different things at once. And I had to like point out like shapes and then the colors. It was pretty intense. And anybody who scored over a 54 had a ADHD diagnosis, and I scored an 86. So she said I'm in the top 93% and above of severe ADHD in adulthood. So again, not an excuse. Right? G.I. Joe says knowing is half the battle. So now I know where to put structures in place for my success. And
This
so
is
we're
the
going to
key, Jess, right
Yes.
there. That's it.
So we're going to give you guys tools for that. If you answered or were nodding your head to some of those, great. Stay tuned for the weeks to come. If you know somebody, your kids or a spouse or anybody, stay tuned and share this with them too, because we're going to give you a lot of tools so that you and your loved ones don't make excuses for your shortcomings.
Because our goal is three things: educate, empower, and encourage you on your mental health journey. For the Mental Health Janitors, I'm Sergeant Q.
I'm Doc Jess.
And we're out.